Welcome to our group presentation on closed reading. Michael, Jennifer, Sue Ellen, Angel, Brooke, and Marie are going to give you some insight about closed reading. During this presentation, Michael is going to explain the history behind closed reading. Jennifer is going to discuss the implications for classroom teachers. Angel will discuss real-world examples. Brooke will give you information and examples you can share with your parents. Marie will go over current headlines. And at the end, we'll give you a list of resources you can look back on. We hope you enjoy our presentation and learn some very valuable information about closed reading.
Closed reading gained popularity from the 1930s through the 1960s. The term has become associated with the methodical reading of a text. Closed reading involves sustained multiple readings of the text. Each successive reading has a different purpose. New criticism theorists such as Richards, 1929, and Brooks in 1947 stipulated close reading as a rigorous, objective method for extracting the correct meaning of a text. Such a reading seeks to discover a text's explicit meaning by meticulously analyzing patterns in its language and the ways the patterns combine throughout a text. Close reading has gone through various incarnations through philosophical buttressing. Reader response theorists, critical theorists, and deconstructionists have all used some principles of close reading. Thus, advocates of close reading share a view that readers should actively examine text multiple times to grasp more and more meanings and to realize better and better how texts are constructed to communicate meaning. However, notions differ regarding which features of text construction to consider and how to consider them. Close reading is an educational practice that was developed for secondary levels of education. The research to show that it is effective at the elementary level is lacking. In literary theory, to read closely is to investigate the specific strength of a literary work in as many possible details as possible. It also means understanding how text works, how it creates its effects on the most minute levels. Close reading includes a productive attentiveness to text, a way of attending text to the interplay of saying and meaning. Yet, recommendations for conducting the methodical interpretation of text, referred to as close reading, vary in important ways. Advocates of close reading share a view that readers should actively examine text multiple times to grasp more and more meaning and to realize better and better how texts are constructed to communicate meaning. Okay. Things to remember. Close reading was developed in the 1920s. Seminal work that was that of Richards, especially in the work Principles of Literary Criticism. It was originally referred to as the New Criticism. Though close reading has been used in secondary classrooms for years, the research endorsing it at the elementary level has lagged behind. Close reading emphasizes the use of text-dependent questions.
Implications for today's North Carolina teachers. What is closed reading? Closed reading is thoughtful, critical analysis of a text that focuses on significant details or patterns in order to develop a deep, precise understanding of the text's form, craft, meanings, etc. Closed reading includes using short passages and excerpts, diving right into the text with limited pre-reading activities, reading deliberately, reading with a pencil, noticing things that are confusing, discussing text with others, and responding to text-dependent questions. Selecting a text. According to Tim Shanahan, Closed reading is a multi-day commitment to a text. You want students to read a text that offers rich enough vocabulary, ideas, and information to read, examine, and discuss over those days without feeling like you're beating a dead horse. When choosing a text, you need to consider the three components of text complexity: qualitative measures, quantitative measures, and the reader and the task. Here's a graphic that shows how all those three work together. Under qualitative, you have text structure, vocabulary, knowledge demands. Under quantitative, you have the lexile number. And under reader and task, you have the motivation, prior knowledge, experiences, etc. There are 3 steps in closed reading. The first read is you're looking for the key ideas and details. During the second read, you're looking at the craft and structure. And then the third read, you're doing an integration of knowledge and ideas. So during the first read, the key ideas and details, you set the purpose. Students read as independently as possible. The first read can be done independently as a read aloud, think aloud, or a paired or shared reading. It should be done without building background knowledge. Students should integrate their own background knowledge with the text as they read. Now focus on key details and ideas. Make sure readers know main idea, story elements, or key details that the author includes. Here are some questions that you can look at or use to ask during your first read. Some of the things are what are the key ideas in the text or story? Who, what, when, where, and why questions. What have you learned from reading this? You want the students during this time to retell the story, explain the main idea, and what the characters are, who the characters are, the setting, and the major events. During the second read, you're looking at the craft and structure. Select a portion or chunk of text that is close read worthy. Students reread a section that includes complex ideas. Should allow students to gain a deep understanding of the text. It should focus on author's craft and organizational patterns, includes vocabulary choices, text structure, or text features. Some questions to ask during this section would be, what kind of text is this? Is it a poem? Is it a nonfiction text? Is it a narrative? You want the students to be able to explain the meaning of certain words, especially the key vocabulary words. Have them look at what was the problem and solution. From what point of view was the story told? And how did the graphics help you understand the text? During the third read, you want students to integrate their knowledge and ideas. They should go even deeper. It requires students to synthesize and analyze information from several texts or media. And students record ideas on sticky notes, graphic organizers, or thinking sheets. During this stage, you want the students to be able to describe the characters, describe the settings, and describe the events. They should be able to use illustrations and details to describe the key ideas. And you want them to be able to explain how the author uses reasons and key ideas to support the main idea. And they can also compare and contrast the characters. These are only a few of the questions from each of the different areas. There are many, many to choose from. The following video explains how to choose a text for closed reading.
In this video, you will learn how to choose a complex text for close reading. As a reader and teacher, you're probably wondering, how does choosing complex text for close reading match the expectations of the Common Core State Standards and fit into the Learn-Zillion approach to literacy instruction? We'll start by talking about why close reading and complex texts are so important. The call for reading complex texts through close reading is found in the first shift of the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy. Understanding this first shift is difficult, so we'll start by reviewing where the basis for choosing complex text for close reading comes from in the Common Core State Standards. The Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy have a specific focus on close reading of texts. The Common Core State Standards provide what they call anchor standards that provide broad guidance for implementation of the standards from kindergarten through grade 12. Anchor Standards 1 and 10 bookend the rest of the reading standards and provide guidance for what students should be doing at all times when reading in all grade levels. Anchor Standard 1 states that students must be able to read closely, to determine what the text says explicitly, and to make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Anchor Standard 10 states that students need to be taught how to read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently. These two standards provide the basic guidelines for why close reading is so important. In order to achieve mastery of standards 2 through 9, students need to learn the text they are rereading well and provide evidence and justification when they're talking and writing about it. In the Learn-Zillion model of close reading, we build on the call to read closely in the anchor standards and name them out as a process of reading and rereading. Learn-Zillion focuses on teaching students how to read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently through guiding students in exploring and analyzing the text. We also believe that teachers play a critical role in the close reading process, using a variety of pedagogical structures to provide scaffolding for their students and their comprehension. The ultimate goal of reading and interacting with complex texts isn't to just help the student to read that one text successfully. Through reading and teaching with complex texts, our goal is to equip students with the skills, strategies, and habits of mind to read, comprehend, and show their comprehension of all texts at their grade level, both independently and proficiently. Before we move on to choosing a text, let's review the three aspects of text complexity. The three aspects of text complexity are the qualitative features, the quantitative measure, and the reader and task challenges. The first factor that informs text complexity is the quantitative measure of the text. Readability is best measured by computer software. Common quantitative measures include Lexile, Fry, and ATOS. The Lexile measures are shown here. The quantitative measure of a text will help you to determine if the text is in a suitable readability range for your grade level band. The second aspect that informs the complexity of a text are the qualitative features of the text. These features can be analyzed by an attentive reader. The Common Core State Standards include rubrics for qualitative measures in both literary and informational texts. Another common qualitative measure are the Fontes and Pinnell reading levels. The four areas of the qualitative measures are meaning, structure, prior knowledge, and language features. The third aspect of text complexity is matching the text to the reader and task. This is best done by a skilled educator, who should consider the emotional and age appropriateness of the text for typical readers at this grade level, and the possible purposes a teacher or student at this grade level could have for reading the text or for completing a task with the text. So now, how do you choose a text? First, you'll begin by zeroing in on a few texts that have the right level of complexity, considering the quantitative, qualitative, and potential challenges the texts and tasks could pose to readers. After you have narrowed down your possible texts to those that are appropriately complex, you'll think specifically about your readers and the close reading you're hoping to do with them. You'll reflect on your students as readers, including studying their reading data. Some questions you can ask yourself are, what types and kinds of texts have been complex for my students? Why were those texts complex for them? What specific reading tasks have been complex for my students? Why were those tasks complex for them? In close reading, your students should struggle and grapple with texts that are increasingly complex for them. Remember that close reading, as one aspect of a complete literacy program, is an opportunity for students to take reading strategies and turn them into automatic skills through instruction and practice. By the third step of choosing a text, you will be closer to finding the right complex text for your close reading. But remember, not all texts are complex, and not all texts are worthy of close reading. As you're looking at the text you're considering, ask yourself, is the text I'm considering worthy of a deep dive? And does that text require repeated readings for true comprehension? An ideal text for close reading is rich and contains many teaching and thinking possibilities. Not every text should be read through close reading. Close reading is just one structure within a teaching repertoire. There are some wonderful texts that you love that may not be good candidates for repeated close reading. Also pay attention to the length of the text. Shorter texts work best because with a complex text, the reader will need to engage in multiple readings. Constraining the length of the text allows the reader to focus on more in a shorter period of time. Finally, your last consideration is to think about your planned purpose for the text you'll choose. Purpose can include genre or type of text, such as a piece of historical fiction, a lab report, a poem, or an op-ed article. Purpose can also include areas of comprehension, such as craft, structure, key ideas or details, integration of ideas and knowledge, building world knowledge, and language. You'll think, are there any types of text or comprehension moves that I know I will be teaching next, or that I'd like to teach again because they've been particularly complex for my students? Teachers in content areas can think about their purpose for using their text in a content-specific manner. Your purpose can include aligning with an area of content you'll be teaching. You'll think, is there a text I've taught with many times, but that I'm eager to see through the lens of close reading? Is there an area where I've previously taught content but not comprehension skills for how to learn content from a text? Is there a text that requires rich comprehension skills that my students could apply to learn content from other similar texts? Now that you understand the role of close reading and text complexity in the Common Core State Standards and the LearnZillion model of close reading, and the 4 considerations for choosing the right complex text for your close reading: complexity of text, complexity for your readers, worth and length of text, and purpose for closely reading the text, you're ready to try choosing your own complex text for close reading.
There are 2 purposes for closed reading. It allows students to relate new textual information to their existing background knowledge and prior experiences in order to expand their schema. It builds necessary habits that readers need when reading a complex piece of text. These habits are identifying their own purpose for reading the text, determining author's purpose, developing their own schema, considering the thought systems of a discipline or genre. For example, a poem differs from a science article. Closed reading must be accompanied by other essential instructional practices. For example, the interactive read aloud and shared reading, teacher modeling and think aloud, guided reading with leveled text, collaborative reading and discussion, independent reading and writing. When not to use closed reading. When reading is easily understood and simply organized, and when skimming a text. The key features of closed reading is short passages, complex text, limited front loading, repeated readings, text-dependent questions, and annotations. Short passages should range from a few paragraphs to a couple pages. The text should be above the student's independent reading level, and it should limit the amount of pre-teaching and front-loading that takes place. Set a purpose, but do not have a lengthy discussion about the meaning of the text. Repeated readings. Each reading has a different purpose or question to be answered. Text-dependent questions or answers to questions require students to provide evidence from the text in their responses. Students must explain where they found the evidence in the text. Annotation. Students take notes on sticky notes. Circle or underline words or sections. Write notes in the margins. And this allows students to find the evidence needed when answering questions.
Closed reading and the Common Core. CCSS-centered curriculum guidelines focus on closed reading. As stated in the CCSS, today's students are asked to read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, to make logical inferences from their interactions with the text, and cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Closed reading of text is designed to produce a coherent representation of what the text says. According to the CCSS, students are required to actively seek the wide, deep, and thoughtful engagement with high-quality literary and informational texts that builds knowledge, enlarges experience, and broadens worldviews. The focus in the CCSS is on the acquisition of knowledge and expanding students' experiences and perspectives, not the aesthetic response of the reader, the appreciation of the text structure, or the author's craft. The CCSS calls for a 50-50 balance between informational and literary text in grades K-5, progressing toward a 70-30 blend in upper grades. The standards also expect text worthy of close attention to present a staircase of increasing complexity. CCSS-based student assessments also emphasize closed reading. Closed reading is very important and should be done 2 to 3 times a week in the classroom. Closed reading and gathering knowledge from specific text should be at the heart of classroom activities and not be consigned to the margins when completing assignments. Kate Ubra has taught high school students for over 14 years. She strives to teach her students how to think independently and go back to the text whenever they have questions. She agrees with the Common Core's emphasis on what the text says as a way into the study of a literary text. She says that her 2 favorite questions are, "What do you think?" and "How do you know?" These 2 questions make students think for themselves and prove their own answers instead of just waiting to get the correct answer. According to Ubra, the students learn more and take pride in their learning when made to prove their answers. This is what closed reading is about, making students think deeper about a text. The Common Core standards suggest several genres of short text, both literary and informational, that can work at the elementary level. Many kinds of traditional literature, folktales, legends, myths, fables, as well as short stories, poetry, and scenes from plays enable and reward closed reading. For informational works, try short articles, biographies, personal narratives, and even some easier primary source materials, such as Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, or sayings from Poor Richard's Almanac for your upper elementary students. Because children's listening comprehension outpaces their reading comprehension in the early grades, it is important that your students build knowledge through being read to as well as through independent reading, with the balance gradually shifting to silent, independent reading. The focus on closed reading has caused many of us to reflect on how we teach children to respond to and analyze text. Especially for elementary grade children, how do we support them in developing their ability to closely examine text to develop nuanced understandings and arguments? According to Dalton, young readers can even use picture books for closed reading. They can look at the pictures to see what content is in the picture, how the illustrator made the picture, and the color and layout of the picture. All these details give deeper meaning to the text of the book. For nonfiction texts, the integration of textual and graphic information is especially important because the graphics often carry a heavy content load. In the broadest sense, closed reading is a focused rereading of a text in which you go beyond a basic understanding of the text. It may involve a passage or key quotation from a text or an entire text, depending on the length. We may reread with a general purpose, such as trying to analyze how the author uses language to evoke an emotional response. Here is a short video talking about closed reading.
The term close reading is being used a lot more these days, and it's because of the Common Core. There's a real shift with the Common Core away from trying to talk about the child's experiences or the teacher's purposes or a dozen other things, but to really put the focus on interpreting the text and thinking about the text. So it's really the author's words that matter most in reading within the Common Core, and that'll be a shift for some teachers. Now the emphasis is really shifting, and it's, bring the attention to the text as quickly as possible and focus the students on figuring certain things out about the text. Because of the nature of close reading, one of the things that you'd expect to see more of is rereading. So you might read a text and then read it again to see if you can figure out more information about it. I think some teachers have students read more, a text more than once now, but it's more for practice. The idea of close reading would be that as you read it, multiple times, you would be figuring out more and deeper information each time. So, let's imagine that you had the students read the text 3 times, which would be a huge amount in today's classrooms. They'd read the text maybe the first time just to figure out what the author was saying. Could you retell it? Could you answer simple questions about it? A second time, maybe they would read, and they still might pick up some details about what the author was saying. But the second time maybe would be a read-in to try to figure out how was the text working, how was it organized? Why did the author make certain choices of words? Why did they leave out other words, and so on? Why did they tell you in the order that they told you? And trying to understand the craft a bit more, and maybe where the author was coming from. Maybe a third reading, and again, you could still be figuring out things, what it said still and how it was working. But a third time might be more of let's really think about what this text means to us. Let's try to, how would we value this? How does it connect up with other texts that we've read? Is it similar? Is it different? Does this author have a different point of view than some other author? Those types of things. And so in a close reading, that rereading becomes very, very important, but not as a practice kind of thing, but much more as an attempt to get more and more information out of the text. But the new standards, the real emphasis is on, can students come away with coherent understandings of what they've read and how those texts work and how those texts connect with other texts, with the idea that the more of that students know, the better able to take on new texts they're going to be. So it really is a very sensible kind of a shift, but what it means is that teachers have to make sure that when students walk away from that reading group, they actually know what that article was about, or that they really understood that story and could write about it or talk about it. In the past, we'd sort of read it and be done with it and forget about it. That's really off the table. We want that knowledge to go into students' memory, that they can use it as they go forward to take on new texts.
Taking a look at real-world examples of close reading, the following video is going to show an example of close reading in which a teacher is going to use Common Core literacy reading strategies with an informational text. His lesson is designed to help students see the connections between the important details and the main idea of the article.
Cambridge, would you mind reading our first learning target today?
I can get the gist and determine the main idea. In a newspaper newspaper article about?
The text I chose for today's class was an article from the Buffalo News about a Seneca school called Faith Keepers that teaches a lot about Seneca language and culture. Look at some of the important words in there. What's an important word in this learning target? Go ahead, Janira.
Seneca.
This Seneca. Right now, the fifth graders are studying the idea of culture through various case studies. Mainly, they're focusing in on indigenous Native American peoples of Western New York. What's another important word that we're looking at, Mr. Steppa?
Main idea.
Main idea. What is that big idea that's really important to the author? And an assessment that I given my students recently, I would notice that they weren't picking out really important details, especially as they relate to the main idea. So this lesson was really designed to help kids to see the connection between important details and main idea. What's another important word that we're looking at, Christian?
Gist.
Gist. What is the gist? I'm asking you to jot the gist in the margin. What are you writing about?
The important parts of the story or article.
Yeah, or what it's about, right? Today we're going to be starting a close read of a brand new text. I want you to think about all the close reading we've done before. We do a close reading process in my classroom, and it's often a multi-day process. And the first time kids read, they're reading just to get the flow of the text from the beginning to the end. This is sort of a low stakes moment in reading. I want you just to read for the flow, all right? Show some perseverance. The second time they go back to the text, they're annotating it in several different ways in order to help them understand it. Circling important words and jotting the gist in the margins. If you're having a hard time, if this text feels really difficult to you, what is something you can do as a reader to help you to get through it and to make it a little more manageable?
Get the gist in baby steps.
Get the gist in baby steps. Take bite-sized sections, little paragraphs, right? Do I understand this paragraph? Do I understand this paragraph? And go through section by section.
I started reading the article by reading the whole thing just for the flow.
I used to do a lot more scaffolding and pre-reading activities before I let kids have a turn with the text. Something I've noticed about my students is that now that they're used to reading a text on their own for the first time and trying it out, they've shown a lot more perseverance.
And then I read it again, underlined all the important ones, like traditional, school, and some of the names.
Choosing a text is always a really important process for me in teaching something like this. I was really looking for something that was an authentic text, something from a primary source, like a newspaper article, something within what they were studying, so that it had a real purpose for them in reading it. And I needed something that was complex, something that pushed them, something that taught them new vocabulary, new academic vocabulary.
After every section I read, I wrote the gist down. And I went back in the paragraph to see if I was right, and then I went to the next one.
I gave my whole class the same complex text. And one reason for this is that we found differentiation is less about text complexity and more about the amount of text the student is asked to work with. For some students, they're able to differentiate for themselves by chunking the text into smaller pieces.
I'm going the gist for 2 paragraphs at a time. Demon Dowdy and his wife, Sandy, started the Seneca Faith Keepers.
For other students, we actually break the text up for them so that they only see a smaller amount of text at a time and don't become overwhelmed by the idea of what they're about to read. So look back at the title, look at some of those important details you underlined, look at the gist you wrote. I want you to jot your idea for this. What do you think the main idea of this article is? And then in about 2 minutes, we're going to transition ourselves over to the carpet area to continue the second half of our lesson. We read about it, we thought about it, we wrote about it, now we get a chance to talk about it. Jada, do you mind reading our second learning target for today?
I can explain the connection between details in the main idea in an article about the Seneca.
You're going to choose one person near you, And you're talking about what do you think the main idea of this article is? And then what is one thing in the article, one little sentence that helped you come up with that main idea?
So in the activity today, I really wanted students to build a connection between important details in the main idea.
The Seneca culture is dying, so they started a school to learn the culture.
So I chose the details I wanted them to work with and hung them in charts around the classroom. And students moved around in groups with Post-it notes, read the detail, and had to make a case for whether or not that detail was important and connected to the main idea. Working with complex text can be really challenging, and these kids are 10 years old, so they get really antsy. So I try to design my lessons in ways that give them time to get up and move around the room.
That's because, like, your mom sees something and she speaks the language, and they won't be able to understand it. Yeah, because it's just part of their culture, right?
I try to get kids talking to each other about text as much as possible, and it allows them to understand parts of text that maybe they didn't understand on their own, but can get from up here.
I want to debrief with this question. What detail did you think was important? How did it connect to the main idea?
The one about the children learn about traditional songs. One of the details I thought was important on the wall was that some of the traditions are like, for the Seneca people, are like singing and dancing. I thought that was an important detail because it like tells you the tradition.
99% of Senecans don't know how to speak Seneca language because that's about how their culture is dying because none of them really know how to speak their own language.
Yeah, so that one really goes back to that first part of the main idea that we said, right? The Seneca culture is dying.
I use a close reading protocol because it gives the kids predictability in how they approach a text, and they've shown themselves to be much more willing to deal with the challenge.
All right, let's do one more. What's a detail? Mr. Suppa.
I did attending school is a major commitment for the young people.
This next video is also an example of close reading being used in the classroom. It will be a 5th grade teacher using close reading in a small group lesson.
General Washington never said very much. He was tall with a quiet voice. He looked like the kind of man who could win a war. What kind of a person is she that she would think that somebody who is quiet and tall could win a war? My name is Meg Smith, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at the University of Hartford Magnet School. I've taught here for the past 5 years. This year, my class has 17 students in it. I have 8 girls and 9 boys. They're from a variety of areas, suburban and urban. I have students from Hartford. I have a good number this year from New Britain. And I have a variety of students with different needs and different interests. The unit that we're working on in Reading Workshop is Unit 4. It is nonfiction research projects, and that kind of picks up off of Unit 3, which is nonfiction, and we're just having the kids dive into it and really pick an area of interest and examine different sources, put it together to really research and think deeply about their topic. And then they're going to produce an essay during their writing time because they're working on argumentative essays.
She probably knows because she's quiet and so she can keep secrets, so she can probably tell that who can keep secrets or not by their facial expression.
Close reading is really having students look deeply into the text beyond the words and really having them ask themselves, what is the author trying to have me understand, and what does that mean and why it's important. And it really just has the students internalize the text and understand it on a deeper level. The Common Core standards are extremely rigorous, and they really ask the kids to go to a much higher level. I've been teaching 5th grade for 11 years, and I'm asking more of my students than I ever have, because the Common Core really wants students to analyze text and also be able to talk about text and internalize it, pull from multiple sources, really analyze primary sources, secondary sources, and consider the importance of those sources as well as the importance of the words and what they mean to the student. And why is that, based on what you know about the African American experience in that time?
Because they thought that black men were as good as the white men, and that they didn't deserve as much as they did.
To prepare the students for close reading, I really have them think about the text, give them questions ahead of time, and I have to kind of lay it out for them before they can really internalize those questions, because the idea is to have them do it automatically, but before you can do that, you have to model it. You have to give them the questions to ask. I also want to give it to them in a variety of ways: written, verbal, having them take their own notes and looking at the notes and seeing which way they, what types of questions they really look at, and maybe seeing what questions they aren't asking. To see what they're missing, and also listening to their conversations. So what does that say about the mothers if the baby is not getting attention?
They're too busy into their work.
I also like to use pictures a lot, because it kind of levels the playing field. Because students who are not reading at the same level as others, they can have a basis for comparison, and it lends itself very nicely to beginning the act of close reading. What I want you to do is I want you to spread these words out. I want to take a look at some important words that I pulled from the story about Benedict Arnold here. Okay, so some of these words I think you're going to know, and some of these are going to be unknown words to us. Okay, so that's kind of that second question about really looking at the words and seeing how the words are important. So we've got foolhardy, impertinence, unrepentant, glory, pride, ambition, and blasphemous. Now, which ones do we know? One of the things that went well today in a close reading small group was when I pulled vocabulary words for the students, and to get them to kind of discuss and go into the text and really think about how the words identified with the character that they're reading about, Benedict Arnold, they were really able to find a specific piece of text evidence and link that to a word. And my hope is that's really going to get them to identifying theme. Because if they're noticing these words and noticing a pattern of the words, they're going to notice a pattern in the character, and then they're going to be able to apply that to theme and really understand what drove Benedict Arnold to do what he did.
What's different about these two is that this one makes the war and the army sound good because you're gonna get paid and that you have food and everything, and they say that you can have land, but in this one it seems like this boy doesn't really want to go at all.
In the small group right now, I really want them next to become a little bit more independent. I want to pull back as a facilitator, and I want them to start to facilitate a little bit more. Once they see me model and they kind of get the hang of it, I want to kind of pass the mic and allow them to take control of the group and to talk about what they've noticed and then ask questions of each other. When I am looking at my students and we're in a small group, I try to really get excited about what they're saying, and my eyes light up because they get excited by me being excited, quite frankly, and I want them to know that what they're doing is important, and I want them to feel like they're historians and they're pulling out facts for the first time, and that this is something that will light them up because it lights me up, and they also think that they're on the right track, so that's going to continue them versus having them pull back, which is not what I want them to do.
This is a one-page fiction reading that's used in a second and third grade classroom as practice for close reading. At the end of the passage, it also has questions that can be used with any story, and this is a text example of close reading. Close reading. Incorporating close reading strategies prepares students for a range of skills. Regarding formative performance tasks, prepares students for fluency, reading comprehension, vocabulary, writing, and regarding diagnostic tools, close reading prepares students for word level reading, foundational skills, independent reading levels, and shared research projects. In close reading, student responses to text-dependent questions are the primary source of evidence that teachers use to gauge how students are engaging with the text and the degree to which they are accomplishing the reading goals.
What should parents know about close reading? It is important for parents to understand the impacts of using close reading in the classroom. Positive impacts of close reading. Through close reading, students are able to read increasingly complex text independently. Through close reading, students can accomplish some major goals of the English language arts and literary Common Core state standards, specifically in the areas of key ideas and details, craft and structure, and integration of knowledge and ideas. A significant amount of research links close reading to significant gains in reading proficiency and finds close reading to be a key component of college and career readiness. It is important for parents to understand what closed reading is and why it is being utilized in the classroom as a tool for reading. A great way to introduce closed reading to parents would be to explain the topic at an open house or a curriculum night at the beginning of the school year. A great way to do this would be to show a short informational video explaining exactly what closed reading is and what their child or children will learn from utilizing closed reading in the classroom. The video below is an example of an informational video that can be utilized during an open house or curriculum night. These are some examples of questions that a teacher would send home to support parents in implementing closed reading at home. It helps them understand what types of questions should be asked during a first read, second read, and third read. For example, to help them out for a first reading to determine what the text says, they could ask questions such as, what is the text about? Or what was the character like and what did they do in the story? A second read is to figure out how the text works. So asking questions such as, who is telling this part of the story? Or what is the author's purpose for this section? And for a third reading, to analyze and compare the text, parents can ask questions such as, what information do these illustrations add to the text? Or how does this picture differ from what the author wrote? And what reasons does the author give to support an idea from the story? These are some examples of handouts that would be beneficial to send home to parents to give them more information on close reading and how to incorporate close reading into reading time at home. The first handout on the left gives parents an idea of strategies to use to support close reading, such as close readers do things like get the gist of what the text is about, use the text to answer questions, talk with each other about what you think it means, read again to summarize or answer specific questions. The second handout on the right gives parents a list of thought-provoking questions they can ask their child when reading at home to support a deeper understanding of a text. Some questions might include, is the author trying to persuade, inform, or entertain the reader? What background knowledge do you have that readers do this? And also, what questions do you have about what you read? This handout is another great resource to give out to parents. It explains some important aspects of close reading, such as choosing books that are an appropriate reading level for their child, how reading can become a part of family time, how to read with a beginning reader, and the importance of checking for understanding of a text. This handout also gives examples of resources that parents can use at home to support reading, such as online books and websites. All of the handouts shown in this presentation are available for use and are free and are listed on the references page if you're interested in using them.
Okay, current thoughts on close reading. The need to find and implement effective reading strategies is ongoing. There are arguments both for and against the use of close reading, as noted in the following Intelligence Squared debate.
Berkeley, which really is pretty illogical that that hadn't been done before. They brought in people from the business community to talk about what skills they needed their employees to have. They brought in content experts. They showed the standards to the associations that represent teachers in mathematics and English language arts, and they took in their input. I think neither Mike nor I would say that each and every standard is perfect, but I think if you look at the process that was used in the development of these standards and compare it to the process that was used under the old standards by most states, that it was very rigorous, and they did look at evidence. I mean, you can disagree, but they did look at evidence.
Carol Burris, have you been refuted on this one?
No, the truth of the matter is one of the things that's very different about the Common Core that I spoke about is, unlike the old Massachusetts standards or standards in New York, which really just identify what kids should know at grade level, the Common Core standards create or contain what's called instructional shifts in practice. 6 in ELA and 6 in math.
ELA?
Yep, English Language Arts. Thank you. For example, the whole idea that it makes sense for young children to engage in close reading, there is absolutely no evidence that that's the case. At the high school level, yes, but not at the elementary level. There was no real research that was based on yanking up Lexile levels. We know from years of developmental reading research that kids do best when they read independently with leveled readers. But the Common Core says no. The Common Core says predominant reading should be on what is considered to be grade level, which has just been increased. And if the kids don't get it, well, the teacher should read it aloud. Let me tell you something. You learned how to ride your bicycle by riding your bicycle. You didn't learn how to ride your bicycle by having your dad never taken his hands off the bar.
Mike, let's let Mike Petrelli respond.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you've raised this a couple times, this idea of close reading. And I spent the big part of the weekend talking to some reading experts getting ready for this question. And I think I have a better understanding. It's going to get a little weedy, but I'll get through it very fast. And it's this. We've had a system for years where we've said, okay, if a child can only read at the first grade level and they're in 5th grade, we're going to give them first grade level books, right? With the hope that over time they would get better. The problem is there's 5 or 6 rigorous studies showing by and large those kids were never getting better at reading. And that the studies showed is what you really need to do is find ways to get the kids to read more challenging texts at their grade level, which means at first, and the teachers today helped explain this so much better than I could, that the teachers start by reading it aloud, having the kids follow along. They do what they call scaffolding over time. And over time, they start to teach the kids how to do this reading so that they can let go of the handlebar and they can ride the bike on their own. And kids who are way behind grade level, including kids who are special education students, are never going to make progress if we don't challenge them with those grade level texts. This is what the evidence says. And the Common Core looks for the evidence.
With the debate going on, a response to an Education Week teacher blog post on the topic of close reading, Rita Platt responded with the following statement: "Close reading is being applied in wildly inappropriate ways and is displacing real-world reading experiences. So if we are going to use close reading effectively, then how should children be reading?" If reading closely is the most effective way to achieve deep comprehension, then that's how we should teach students. So in order to better understand exactly how close reading differs from previous reading strategy instruction methods, a side-by-side comparison is offered by LILAC, the Literacy, Language, and Culture. Reading strategy versus close reading. Before reading, strategy instructions were to set a purpose for reading, preview the text, activate background knowledge, and predict. Whereas with close reading, the pre-reading strategy is simply to pertain your elements of thought. During reading, the strategy instruction included cross-checking, reread, predict and confirm, skip, read on, and then go back, and then connect background knowledge to the information in the text. Whereas with close reading, there are different levels. You have a close reading level 1, which is the first step to understanding. Close reading level 2 is reader's mind constructs the author's thinking. And this strategy also involves inferencing, concepts, assumptions, implications, and point of view. The after reading strategies between the two are different in that previous methods you had to retell and summarize, use a graphic organizer, draw conclusions, and then reread. Whereas after reading with close reading involves elements of thought, purpose, question, information, and then the author's purpose. Dr. Douglas Fisher, a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University, responds to a Q&A session sponsored by McGraw-Hill Education to give us insight into what close reading is.
Hi, I'm Josh Bicknell with McGraw-Hill Education, and I'm talking today to Douglas Fisher about close reading and how it relates to the Common Core state standards. So Doug, how would you describe close reading? How would you define it?
A close reading is a careful and purposeful reading. Well, actually, it's rereading. It's a careful and purposeful rereading of a text. It's an encounter with the text where students really focus on what the author had to say, what the author's purpose was, what the words mean, what the structure of the text tells us. It really is getting to what Louis Rosenblatt talked about as a transaction between the reader and the text. Louis Rosenblatt, the originator of reader response theory, really talked about understanding what the author had to say and not impugning those authors' words, but really getting what the author had to say and bringing some of your own ideas to bear on that text. In a close reading, we have to have students reread the text. We give them questions, text-dependent questions that require that they go back into the text and search for answers. These aren't simply recall questions, just the facts of the text, but rather questions that allow students to think about the text and the author's purpose and the structure and the flow of the text. Close reading requires that students actually think and understand what they're reading.
Thanks, Doug. That was a great answer. My second question for you has to do with Common Core state standards in close reading. So is close reading part of addressing the Common Core state standards? Can you elaborate?
Close reading isn't in the Common Core state standards. However, an analysis of the Common Core state standards really says you've got to learn the text well. The Common Core state standards require that students provide evidence and justification for their answers. The only way we know how students can do this, that they really learn to provide evidence and justification, is if they closely read. When we have students really read carefully, they pay attention to the words, the ideas, the structure, the flow, and the purpose of that text, they're ready to answer more complex questions that require that they really think about what the author said and compare that with what they know, what they believe, and what they think.
Doug, thank you so much for talking to me today about close reading and the Common Core state standards. So tune in next time. We'll talk to Doug about what close reading looks like in the classroom. So stay tuned. Thank you. Hi, I'm Josh Bicknell with McGraw-Hill Education, and I'm back with Doug Fisher talking about close reading and what it looks like in the classroom. So Doug, can you explain what you would expect to see in a classroom where they're practicing close reading? What does close reading look like?
There are a variety of ways to teach students through close reading in a classroom. Most of the time that involves selecting a short passage of text, having students encounter the text first without any kind of pre-teaching or any kind of front-loading, maybe pointing out a couple of really complex words, but really letting students encounter that text the first time. Inviting them to read that text, asking them some text-dependent questions, which might be about the key details, the general understanding, the structure, the vocabulary, the author's purpose, but inviting them back into that text several times. One of the things we know with the close reading is that students read with a pencil. Well, not literally with a pencil, but with argumentation. The students are regularly taking notes as they read. They're extracting ideas and concepts that they want to remember from the text. And that reading with a pencil helps students go back into the text over and over again to really get a strong sense of what that author's trying to say. In a close reading, students also talk about what they're thinking about. They share their evidence with peers. They use argumentation. They agree, they disagree. They ask for evidence. They provide evidence. They offer counterclaims. It's that give and take of discussion in which the text serves as a primary tool for forwarding that conversation. That's what we're looking for in a classroom that has close reading. In addition, teachers can model during a close reading. Students notice things that are confusing for them. They notice things that they understand, and they notice things that were difficult. When the teacher notices that a lot of students have the same misunderstanding, the teacher can build that into some of the modeling and talk about how the teacher thinks the text is working, how the teacher is noticing vocabulary or structures or general ideas. And then ask another text-dependent question to drive the students back to the text to look for additional evidence. It's an ongoing and recursive process where students go back to the text based on the questions they're asked, including up to inferencing questions, where students go back to the text to look for evidence and really grasp a deep level of understanding of that text.
Thank you so much, Doug, for all of your great information and insights into close reading and the Common Core state standards. That's my interview with Doug Fisher. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have some great knowledge and some great things you can take back to the classroom with you. Thank you, and have a great day.
So in order to effectively teach students how to read using close reading, we must teach them how to use the questions as they follow along. Who is speaking in the passage? Who seems to be the main audience, or to whom is the narrator speaking? What is the first thing that jumps out at me, and why? What's the next thing I notice? Are these two things connected? How? And do they seem to be saying different things? What seems important here, and why? What does the author mean by, and what exact words lead me to this meaning? Other questions students should consider using close reading strategies are: is the author trying to convince me of something? What and how do I know? Is there something missing from this passage that I expected to find? Why might the author have left this out? Is there anything that could have been explained more thoroughly for greater clarity? Is there a message or a main idea? What in the text led me to this conclusion? And how does the sentence or passage fit into the text as a whole? Nancy Boyles, Graduate Reading Program Coordinator for Southern Connecticut State University, says that students who learn to ask themselves such questions are reading with the discerning eye of a careful reader. So what must we keep in mind to effectively incorporate close reading into the classroom? Teaching close reading is not the same as chopping up a book into so many pieces that it becomes unrecognizable. It is accomplished better by having students read large, uninterrupted chunks of text and then strategically having them return to key passages for second or third draft reading and thinking. The close reading PLT follow-up activity. Using slides 14, 16, and 18 from the close reading presentation, complete the following activity. 1. Choose a text that is close reading appropriate. 2. Compose 3 questions that students would answer the first time they read the text. See slide 14 for reference. Number 3. Compose 3 questions that students would answer the second time they read the text. See slide 16 for reference. Number 4. Compose 3 questions that students would answer the third time they read the text. And see slide 18 for reference. Remember, all questions must be able to be answered using evidence from the text. These are our references, and thank you for watching our presentation.